WebRTC, first of all, a few words about who Mavenir is and what our interest in WebRTC is. Mavenir's a company focused on transforming the mobile network environment for 4G, predominantly 4G LTE carriers. We're delivering voice, video, and messaging solutions to that mobile carrier audience. We've been in this business for about 8 years now. Just earlier this month, we were fortunate enough to IPO. We were unfortunate enough to IPO on the same day as a small local company you may have heard of called Twitter, which meant that we got that much coverage, but these things happen. We're headquartered out of Dallas, but our business is very global. And some of the perspectives I'll share with you today aren't necessarily specific to the US market. They're looking much more at the global activities that we see going on around WebRTC. We have customer engagements. We've got trials that we're doing with mobile operators today on WebRTC. And I'd like to share with you some of the learnings that we've had from those trials and where those things are going to and what lies behind that in terms of operator objectives. So I'll try and keep this away from being a product pitch. I also, I've looked at some of the other presentations we've had today, and at some level we all agree, WebRTC is good and it can introduce lots of new capabilities, and IMS is something that a lot of mobile operators have invested in, and WebRTC and IMS work together to bring solutions to mobile operators. But I want to give a little bit more color to that, point out some of the challenges that exist in achieving this, and what some of the upside may be for the mobile operator, or potentially the challenges that may befall them if they don't act. So LTE is here today. There's been a massive investment in build-out here in North America. LTE is probably well ahead of every other market that we're active in around the world. The major tier ones have invested a great deal in building out the broadband network, the LTE broadband network, and that's a tremendous asset, not just for the operators themselves, but for anyone building services on top of that platform. The question is, are we actually building a platform as the mobile industry? Are we building a platform for other people to exploit as bringing services to the subscriber? Or are we as a mobile industry actually going to play a role in creating and delivering those services? And I think really today the jury is out on that. The challenge for the operator is that if you spend all your time building this high-quality network and don't introduce services, you are in fact a bit pipe, whether you like it or not. If you invest in creating the services, then you better make those services more appealing, more interesting than the ones which they can obtain from people like Facebook, people like Google. And that's a hell of a challenge, because they're innovative, they're fast-moving, and they're investing a tremendous amount in grabbing eyeballs and attention from your customers. VoLTE, voice over LTE, we see it as an inflection point. Yes, in the LTE networks today that exist with the tier ones here in the US, you still have voice telephony, but it's not well integrated with the LTE capabilities in the network, and as a result you have latency around call setup. In some networks you don't have voice and data capabilities simultaneously available, so the user experience isn't all that it can or should be. So for every operator that we talk to around the world, the next step is introducing voice over LTE. And why does that matter to us when we're talking about WebRTC? Well, once you're introducing voice over LTE, you're introducing mobile voice over IP. And once you have that IP transport, once you have that IP capability, the question becomes, why don't I offer mobile WebRTC as my VoIP solution? Why isn't that the technology that I use to deliver VoIP to the mobile device? It's a good question, and I think it's one that an increasing number of operators are asking themselves. Is there a point where the access mechanism on the device may move from being IMS and SIP-based to being RTC-based? And we'll talk a little bit about where that might end up. Certainly, it is a conceivable outcome. But the question is the industry, is the ecosystem ready for that today? And I think our answer is solidly no, it's not ready yet. It's a long way from being ready yet. RCS, 6 months ago I stood on a similar stage and talked about RCS and as next generation dial tone. I think in 6 months, one of the things we've seen is that as rich communications, the industry global approach towards rich media delivery for the next generation telephony experience is slower to gain traction than anyone had anticipated. It's happening, but it's happening slowly. And there are some inhibitors or some challenges for rich communications. None of them around subscribers' willingness to use the service, but many of them around how you implement the service and how the ecosystem comes together, how clients come together with network elements to deliver these experiences. I've heard many people talk about how difficult or painful the IMS aspect of implementing rich communications is. We would say it's not, IMS isn't the problem. It's bringing together client experiences with server infrastructure that really is the major challenge. And as people look for rich communications, which has embedded OEM client driving its user experience, the challenge is those clients aren't available, or they're being rolled out slowly, or when they are rolled out, they aren't functionally rich. And that is the biggest inhibitor that I see for operators making the investment to roll out RCS. They're waiting for some indicator that the client experience is ready for mainstream, is ready to impress customers, and isn't just another one of those telco things like MMS, which kind of looks a bit flaky and you can do better with OTT. So our challenge as an industry is, can we move quickly enough? Will RCS, will rich communications remain relevant if there are other ways of achieving the same sort of user experience over the LTE transport that we're putting in place? And we think that there are positive signs here that something can be achieved, and that WebRTC may actually be one of the paths to success for rich communications as opposed to a competitor. So what's missing? The open client ecosystem for rich communications. Operators want to be able to compete. They want to be able to compete on feature functionality. Rich communications started out with this concept that everyone would have the same user experience. Ubiquity, consistency. Well, that's a great idea, but do operators really want to invest in an ecosystem that makes them just the same as everyone else? Not really. They want to be able to add their own features, add their own capabilities. Yes, they want the global interoperability of messaging services, video calling services, image sharing services, file sharing services. That's great, but how they present that to the user, they want to be able to control that. And RCS, as it was originally envisaged, didn't give them that. We think one of the ways that that can be delivered is through what's being identified as a set of client APIs that have rapidly been rushed through the GSMA standardization activities, and that can create an ability to isolate the user experience from the RCS enablers. And that's a great way that you can have rapid introduction of new capabilities, mashing up RCS features, RCS functionality with other data streams. But another way to achieve the same thing is to use WebRTC as the gateway technology, as the access technology to those enablers which have been put in place as RCS enablers. As someone mentioned earlier, I think that the point with RCS isn't just the user experience, it's what you create as a common layer of enablers to support new services in the network. And the excellence of user experience, I think one thing OTT has taught us is that excellent user experience is what drives people to adopt services. And if you cannot provide a consistent, excellent user experience, launching new services, no matter how clever they are, is not going to be successful. And the point I would make here is that Apple has done a really good job with user experience, but also the success of something like rich communications hinges upon Apple's integration and openness to making those services available on Apple devices. In some of the markets that we look at globally, 40 and 50% of the smartphone devices are Apple devices. Today, the solution for rich communications on those devices is a downloadable, over-the-top experience. It's no better than any other OTT, and the operator can't drive their differentiation and their value add while that ecosystem remains closed. So that's one of the big challenges that we have as an industry. So over-the-top services do exist. I think I would categorize really that we have lots of different players trying to gain control over, influence over the user experience, the user services on device. There's carrier OTT, and I think carrier OTT is a very important piece of the picture that we're looking at here today. Carrier OTT may well be the place where we can test and prove and develop WebRTC-based experiences in the mobile operator context. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Device OTT, well, we've all seen the device today in the last, well, since 2008, the device players have really taken control of user experience and have gained a tremendous amount of the value that exists in the mobile ecosystem through controlling user experience. And if you look at, as was mentioned earlier, what's happened with iMessage, what happens with FaceTime, and there are lots of other things going on, such as Skype integration into Windows Mobile, where you have the client operating system vendor introducing services which intercept what would traditionally be the core mobile telephony service, whether it's messaging, voice, or video, and provide that service outside of the operator's domain. That's a tremendous challenge for the operator to overcome. It's really difficult when someone's able to get past you and actually use your sales channel to gain customers. So that's a challenge for the operator that needs to be overcome if they're to reestablish some control and influence over the end-to-end experience. And then we have what I would call traditional OTT. Now, traditional OTTs are small, insurgent companies. Some of them have been the source of great innovation in our business. And I think while the operators, the mobile operators sometimes have looked at these insurgents and they've felt threatened by them, we're increasingly seeing a trend towards traditional OTT players, the small insurgents, partnering with the mobile operators. You look at some of the players like WhatsApp, who have absolutely, we talk about iMessage taking messaging traffic away from the operator, but in the rest of world environment, WhatsApp has decimated the business of value-added services in SMS for mobile operators. But now we're seeing in many markets in Asia that WhatsApp are actually partnering with mobile operators to generate a revenue stream. So there's a disruption, but then there's a next phase where you try to convert that market that you developed into a revenue stream, and often partnership is the way that those small companies can generate a legitimate revenue stream. I'll skip through this, really, we've covered it. The cutting edge of user experience, I think, is always something that's going to be done by people who are close to the customer. And I think one of the challenges that any of the standards-based activities that have happened in the mobile space in the last few years, any of the challenges that you've seen there have really come from the fact that you have a group of bearded 50-something-year-olds sitting in a room trying to work out what 16-year-olds want to do with mobile devices. It is the wrong way to build user experiences. We bearded 50-something-year-olds are much better at working out protocols. We're much better at working out how box X and box Y should talk to each other. This we can do well, but working out what a user experience should be and how those boxes should be utilized to create value, maybe we're not the right people to do that. And maybe it's people within 50 miles of this room who are the best positioned people to innovate, think quickly, fail quickly, and learn and move on. And I think that's something that the mobile industry is still trying to come to terms with. Perhaps here in North America, there's more openness to this. But in the rest of the world, it is a challenge getting some of these messages across. So for the mobile operator, we believe that WebRTC, it creates an opportunity to make services available, to leverage the investment in building a network, in developing identity management, authentication, in taking those core capabilities of the network and exposing them over any web-connected device. Now, that's something traditionally OTTs have done. And in many cases, I think the challenge for a mobile operator, or indeed a fixed broadband operator, is to separate in their mind the engineering of a network, which has been their core competency to date, and the creation of services, which they may or may not want to or be able to invest in doing. And if they can't do it themselves or don't want to do it themselves, they need to seek partners who can help them through that process. WebRTC is a great way to create an ecosystem where partners can develop those services for you, can work with you to create compelling use cases that expose your network assets in a way that generates value. Now, the challenge is, how quickly can you move into that space, and is the technology ready today to allow you to do that? I'll skip forward, we're a little short on time. We've been involved in trials over the last 6 months with a number of operators. Some of the most interesting activities we've been doing have been in Central and Eastern Europe. I think part of the unique dynamic there is that the network scale is quite small, that it's a good place to experiment, and there are particular local challenges that make operators willing and interested to create, local language variants of service or locally focused services. So, we've been doing the usual things with voice telephony, video telephony, adding the rich communications messaging, call logging, essentially taking the whole IMS calling experience, the rich communications calling experience, and making it available not just through fixed-line browsers, but also through mobile browsers. And that's where we've hit a lot of the challenges, and the challenges which, until we're able to resolve them as an industry, will continue to be the stumbling blocks for us in moving WebRTC from the science project to commercial mainstream. Essentially, the maturity of mobile device solutions just isn't there today. The quality of both audio and video experiences are highly dependent upon the network and the bandwidth available and the reliability of the underlying transport mechanism. When we do face-to-face comparisons between, let's say, SIP softphone and WebRTC solutions, it's a very different experience, and the reliability with WebRTC just isn't there yet. We're not saying it won't be, but if you're going to a mobile operator environment and you're seeking to become the transport mechanism for core utility consumer telephony, which is the opportunity that lies in front of us here, then it needs to be a hell of a lot more reliable. It needs to work every time. And this is where I come back to that point I made earlier about operator OTT. We're seeing, it was initially T-Mobile with Bobsleigh. There's one that Bouygues has launched in France recently. Operator OTT services, which they target, let's say, best efforts voice. It's similar in some ways to voice over Wi-Fi services that have been launched as ways to extend or fill in coverage gaps. One of the great opportunities that these things present is they allow operators to say, okay, we've got our core services that need to be 5 nines, need to be bulletproof, but then on the other side, we have another service addressing another community of subscribers where we can take some risks technologically, where we can offer a different service, possibly with a different commercial model. And that, we believe, is where the real opportunity in the short term is for WebRTC, in supporting those alternate business models. The business challenges, well, I've mentioned one of them already here. Operators offer 5 9 service. Sometimes when you have a drop call, you don't think that, but in reality, the quality of service that mobile operators deliver is regulated, and it can appear very difficult for them to introduce new services that don't meet those regulatory requirements. WebRTC isn't there yet. In terms of business cases, you're talking about something which has the potential to cannibalize the traditional core business. Now, here in North America, I think, most operators have come to terms with the idea that cannibalization is the reality that they have to live with. And so we've seen the movement of the value for an operator from voice and messaging into mobile data. And the data is now the large portion of what you're billed for. But there are many other markets where voice and telephony are still seen as the core services. And for an operator who sees it that way, then it's a challenge selling them the concept that here's an open solution where perhaps in the future you don't charge for voice explicitly, you don't charge on a per minute basis. And those sorts of changes in outlook and changes in perspective may seem very obvious when you sit here, but as you travel around operators in other parts of the world, it does not seem so obvious at all. And I think one of the challenges is building solutions that don't just fit one business model, but actually can be used across a wide set of business models and business cases globally. The inhibitors, I think one of the biggest inhibitors is the perception that IMS is complex, it's difficult, it takes you years to do it. Yes, it can, but we've deployed IMS solutions that have taken months, not years. I think the degree to which IMS technology can be accelerated is tremendous if people are willing to commit to it. But the fear, uncertainty, and doubt factor is considerable. The desire to charge for every bit, byte, service, and feature can be a crippling burden when you try introducing new services. Often we find that the integration of billing and charging is 60–70% of the complexity associated with the introduction of any new service. If you can simplify billing and charging, if you can move away from having to integrate every platform with your charging platform, then there's a tremendous opportunity there and an inhibitor if you don't do it. And this idea that you have to take small steps. With WebRTC, there are big steps that can and should be taken, but it takes a certain amount of bravery to make those steps. Not invented here. The telephony world is notorious for creating boundaries and barriers, even within its own standards. Taking a web-centric technology and moving it into the heart of telephony is something that is going to have to overcome a lot of not invented here syndrome. And finally, the quest for perfection. We mentioned 5 nines already. User experience. I've seen some of these trials that we've run. Sometimes the biggest barrier that we come up against is that one time out of 50 when you will have a failed call attempt, or you will have unacceptable levels of jitter, unacceptable video quality. It will set a perception that is almost impossible to fix. We've been doing things with clients, and we've been showing end-to-end rich communications experiences for the last 3 or 4 years. And the one common theme is a bad demo typically kills the technology. And I have seen more bad demos of WebRTC than almost any other technology. And you do that in front of telephony executives, and that's it. You're done. Just pack your bag and leave. It's probably quicker and easier that way. So in summary, we think WebRTC has tremendous opportunity, tremendous potential for the mobile operator to be able to free your services from the access network, to be able to deliver services over the top, to take the approach that over the top has taken to you and turn it around so that you can make services available on any web-connected device. That's an absolutely wonderful opportunity for the operator. It can also increase the effectiveness of OTTs. The OTTs can use WebRTC technology against you if you don't come up with ways to make that leap yourself. And we think it can enable a collaborative model where you take the best of user experience development from the OTT community and combine it with those network enablers, primarily IMS-based network enablers, which you expose through gateways, which you expose through APIs, and get that user experience that is tight, good quality, low battery consumption. Get that user experience combined with the innovation that web-based development has given us in all areas of IT over the last few years. So that was all I had to say to you. Hopefully it wasn't too much of a product pitch, but I know how these things can get, and I hope you had a good lunch.